friends, Aunt C here. Today's story is a chapter book, so it's pretty long. So if you need to stop after a chapter and come back and watch it again at a different time, that's totally okay. Or you can sit through and listen to the whole story, but it's all up to you, okay? So if you need to pause it and come back later, that's totally cool, all right? I know I usually choose short books. I chose a really big book today, but it'll be so fun, all right? Bye! Hi friends, Aunt C here. We moved to a different room today, but I'm going to read this book. It's called Pardon That Turkey. All right, so this is about how Thanksgiving became a holiday, because we read the story about the first Thanksgiving, but just because you have a fun meal doesn't make it a holiday. You have to have the government, which is like the president, actually make something a holiday so that everything will close down, right? Because the banks aren't open, the stores aren't open. There might be a few stores open on Thanksgiving, but not everybody has to go to work. So in order for something to be a holiday, it has to make sure that all of those things happen. So let's look about how Thanksgiving became a holiday, all right? Think about the first Thanksgiving. We all know the story. In the fall of 1620, the Pilgrims came to America from England. Their ship, the Mayflower, landed in Cape Cod Bay in Massachusetts. It seemed like a good place to live, and the Pilgrims decided to name their new home Plymouth. But starting a new life was hard work, and the winter was cold and terrible, and many of the Pilgrims didn't live through it. The following autumn, the settlers who had survived that first year in Plymouth gathered together to feast and give thanks. Today, we give thanks, just like the Pilgrims, with a big, special meal. We eat until we can hardly move, filling up on sweet potatoes, corn, stuffing, cranberry sauce, gravy, biscuits, and rich desserts. And of course, we have a big Thanksgiving turkey. While we eat, we think about the Pilgrims. After all, they are the reason we have a holiday to celebrate, right? As it turns out, that's not entirely true. Our holiday does honor that first feast, but the fact that we have a national holiday at all is the work of one special woman. Her name is Sarah Josepha Hale. Back in Sarah's time, there was no national Thanksgiving. Many towns did celebrate a day of thanks, but in different ways and on different days. President George Washington had tried to create a national Thanksgiving in 1789, but it hadn't lasted. Sarah thought all Americans should celebrate together, and she was just the person to make it happen. But it wouldn't be easy. For 17 years, she wrote letters and magazines about Thanksgiving, and finally, someone agreed with her, and Thanksgiving as we know it came to be. There's George Washington. Looks like there's people at another people's house with pie. Today, Thanksgiving is celebrated on the same day by the whole country. There is even a national turkey who gets pardoned from the president. And it's all thanks to the woman who spent her life fighting so that we could give thanks. There she is, writing letters. Sarah was born on a farm in Newport, New Hampshire on October 24th, 1788. She was the third of 4 children born to Captain Gordon Buell and his wife Martha. Newport was a very small settlement and the school was not very good, so Sarah's mother taught her children at home. Sarah learned a great deal from her that girls were not usually taught in those days. Most girls only learned sewing, cooking, and housekeeping, but Sarah's mother taught her to read and write well and gave her a lifelong love of books, songs, and poetry. Although Sarah loved all of her siblings, she was closest to her second brother, Horatio. When Horatio was old enough, he went to study at Dartmouth College, and she stayed home with her mother. Being a girl, no one thought she needed a college education, but Horatio knew that Sarah was smart. When he came home from college, he taught her Latin, math, and other subjects that he had learned. And so, Sarah got a college education without ever setting foot in a classroom. When Sarah turned 18, she began teaching at the village school in Newport. This was a big change for the town. Back then, only men taught school. But Sarah was determined. She proved She proved to the school board how much she knew and asked them to let her try. She did so well that she worked as a teacher for 7 years. During that time, Sarah's father opened the Rising Sun Tavern on Main Street in Newport. It was there in 1811 that Sarah met David Hale, a young lawyer from nearby village. David had come to Newport to open a law office, and he and Sarah became friends at once. 2 years later, they were married. And like her brother, David knew how smart Sarah was. And after their wedding, they began to study together for 2 hours every night. They learned French, geology, and botany. That's the science of plants and flowers. And they began to write poetry and short stories. David offered to help her. Instead of the fancy style and big words she had always used, he showed her how to write, simply and directly. Easier words and simpler style meant that more readers could understand what she had to say. Sarah and David had a very happy life together, but in September of 1822, after 9 years of marriage, David fell ill and died, and 2 weeks later, his last child was born. Sarah never got over her grief. In fact, she wore black dresses for the rest of her life, but she knew she had to be strong and figure out how to make a living. After all, she now had 5 children and very little money, and she had to find a way to support her family. Sarah tried sewing hats at home, but she wasn't very good and hated it. Working day after day with her hands wasn't for her. At night, she kept busy by writing poetry and even began a novel. Sarah published her first book of poetry in 1823. She was proud of her work, but most readers did not like it. And then, 5 years after David's death, she published her first novel, Northwood, and it was a huge success. Sarah received many letters about her novel. She even got an offer to become the editor of Ladies Magazine, a new magazine for women. Sarah accepted, and she and her children moved to Boston. Sarah Hale was 40 years old, and her real career had just begun. For the next 9 years, Sarah worked as the editor of Ladies Magazine, and she was the first woman in the country to be an editor of the magazine. Ladies Magazine had something of interest to every kind of woman. It had pictures of beautiful clothes, recipes, and ideas of how to improve the home. And as the editor, it was Sarah's job to decide what to include in every issue. But Sarah had something to say too, and the magazine was the perfect way to be heard. And as the editor, she could write about the things that were important to her. Sometimes she wrote about women's education, and other times she wrote about the need for more female doctors or more space for children to play. Sarah became well known and respected. Her readers listened to her and began to fight for her causes too. And instead of believing that their only job was to stay at home and care for their children, women began to believe that what Sarah told them. They believed that they could make a difference in the world. In 1837, Sarah left Ladies Magazine to work as the editor of Godey's Ladies Book. Godey's was the most popular magazine in the country, and like Ladies Magazine, it had pictures of clothes, recipes, and home ideas. It also had short stories by famous writers of the time, such as Edgar Allan Poe, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. At Godey's, Sarah could reach even more people with her writing. Sarah didn't just write articles for the magazine, though. She wrote more novels and children's books. She wrote more poetry. She even wrote one of the most famous children's verses in the English language, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Do you know that song? This lady wrote it. The lady we're reading about wrote that song. That's so cool. But Sarah wanted to do more than just write. She wanted to make a difference, and she knew just how to do it. Sarah had felt for a long time that it was important for America to have a national day for giving thanks. In 1846, she finally decided to fight for the cause. Sarah knew she might have to wait some time for her dream to come true, but she never dreamed that she would have to wait 17 years. That's a long time to wait. Sarah began for her fight for a national Thanksgiving by writing articles in Godey's. She told her readers what a good idea it would be and asked for their support. She even wrote articles describing wonderful dishes and fun family games for such a holiday. But as years passed, with no change, she decided to do more. Sarah began to write to politicians around the country, explaining why she thought the holiday was needed. Over the years, she wrote thousands of these letters, and she encouraged Godey's readers to write to their local politicians too. Sarah's readers were very loyal to her. Thousands of them wrote letters just as she'd asked. They told their politicians they wanted to celebrate a day of giving thanks. The politicians listened. One by one, they began to declare a day of celebration for their states. Not every state recognized the holiday, of course, but a lot of them agreed to it. Remember, our country has 50 states. And if every state had a different Thanksgiving, if you lived in a different state, you wouldn't get to celebrate the same day as your family. But this was still not enough for Sarah. Slavery and other issues were tearing the northern and southern states apart, and it seemed as though the country would soon split in two. Sarah knew that a national Thanksgiving was now more important than ever, and she believed that celebrating a holiday together would be the best way to keep the Union whole. So she picked up her pen again. This time she wrote directly to the President of the United States, Zachary Taylor. She asked him to declare one day each year for the country to give thanks together. But President Taylor was busy with other matters, and the country was facing a crisis, and he did not have time to bother with a holiday. He wrote her back and told her no. Sarah did not give up. When President Taylor left office, she wrote to the new president, Millard Fillmore. But President Fillmore did not consider a Thanksgiving holiday very important either. Sarah was probably upset by his response, but she didn't let it stop her. Deep down, she was sure that the key to a national Thanksgiving was getting the president to agree. And when Franklin Pierce was elected president, she wrote another letter. So this is before we could just text people on our phones or call them. We had to write down and send in the mail anything we wanted to say because we didn't have cell phones or computers back then. President Pierce said no to her too. Sarah waited until he left office and tried again with the next president, James Buchanan. But by now, the country was ready to break apart. Southerners felt people in the North did not understand them or their way of life, and they thought they would be better off starting their own country, and it seemed like the only way to settle the issue would be with a war. Sarah explained to President Buchanan that a National Day of Thanks would help bring people together, but he did not agree with her. Sarah still did not give up. In 1861, the Union came apart, and the Southern states broke away and formed the Confederate States of America. A civil war had begun. And as the years of war rolled by, Sarah wrote a letter to yet another president, the fifth since she'd begun fighting for her cause. This time, a letter went to Abraham Lincoln. Sarah pointed out that now was the best time to declare a day of Thanksgiving. Reminding people of their blessings could help the Union come back together. President Lincoln saw her point, and the country did need something to help pull it together. And in 1863, he declared Thanksgiving a national holiday. It would be celebrated every year for the last Thursday in November. After 17 years and thousands of letters to presidents, congressmen, and local officials, Sarah's fight had come to an end. She had begun her cause at the age of 58 with no more than an idea, but now it was over and she was 75. Few women ever accomplished as much as Sarah did. She wrote fiction and poetry, including a verse that's still recited today. She saw opportunities for women increase in large parts because of the articles she had written over the years. She was the driving force behind the two great magazines, but none of her accomplishments took her longer to achieve or made her prouder than the creation of a National Thanksgiving Day. Of course, Thanksgiving isn't happy time for everyone. Oh, let's see there's a little bit more. This is a long story today. That's okay. Although Thanksgiving is only one day long, people celebrate it as a part of a 4-day holiday. The holiday begins on Thursday and goes through the weekend. It's a time to get together with friends and family and to give thanks for the year. And of course, it's a time to enjoy a big Thanksgiving feast. And at the center of all is a great turkey. But not every turkey raised every year becomes dinner. Sometimes After President Lincoln created a national Thanksgiving, a new tradition began. According to the tradition, one turkey out of the millions raised that year will receive a pardon from the President of the United States. That means the turkey's life is saved. Instead of becoming dinner, he gets sent to a nearby petting farm. The President has the power to pardon people for their crimes, so why not turkeys? This tradition started many years ago, and there's even a story that President Lincoln himself gave the first pardon to the first turkey. This makes sense since he was the president who declared Thanksgiving a holiday. The story says that President Lincoln's youngest son, 10-year-old Tad, had a pet turkey named Jack, and the turkey had been given to the president, and he had turned it over to his son. And when Thanksgiving became a holiday, Tad realized that his pet turkey might turn out to be a holiday dinner. He didn't like that idea at all. Tad burst into President Lincoln's office in the middle of an important meeting and asked his father if he could please spare Jack's life. The president enjoyed granting his son's request, and he happily agreed. Months later, during the election of 1864, the president saw Jack strutting around the voting booths at the White House. President Lincoln asked Tad, "What business has a turkey stalking about the polls in that way? Does he vote?" "No," Tad is supposed to have said. "He's not of age." The story of Tad's turkey is fun, but it may not be true. Some versions say that Jack was not a turkey at all, but a toy soldier. The doll was sent to the gift to Tad by the Seminary Commission of New York. According to this story, Tad was playing with Jack, his brothers, and some friends. The boys apparently decided that Jack was disobeying military law once again, and the Lincoln boys asked their father to pardon Jack. In this version of the story, President Lincoln actually wrote a note that said the doll, Jack, is pardoned by order of the president. There is no evidence that either story is true, but the tradition of pardoning one turkey every Thanksgiving has gone on through the years. So where did the turkey pardoning tradition really begin? Lots of people think it started with Harry Truman, but it isn't exactly true. The National Turkey Federation did give President Truman a turkey in 1947. It's the first time the NTF had ever given a bird to any president, and it was the start of a very real tradition. And every year since then, the NTF has given the president and his family a holiday turkey. But President Truman did not pardon the turkey he was given. In fact, the bird he was given on December 15th and was meant for Christmas dinner, not Thanksgiving. There's no proof that President Truman ever pardoned a Thanksgiving turkey or even thought of pardoning one. And then in November of 1963, President John F. Kennedy was presented with a turkey for Thanksgiving at the Rose Garden of the White House. And although President Kennedy said that he did not intend to eat the bird, he never said he was pardoning it. Even so, the next day, the newspapers said the turkey had been pardoned. And in 1987, President Ronald Reagan joked at the press conference that if his Thanksgiving turkey was not already intended for a petting farm, I would have pardoned him. The real beginning of the pardoning tradition started with President George H.W. Bush. President Bush was presented with his first turkey in 1989 during his first year in the White House. The president thanked the NTF and said, "Let me assure you and this fine Tom turkey that he will not end up on anyone's dinner table. Not this guy. He's been granted a presidential pardon as of right now, allowing him to live out his days on a farm not far from here." And it was the first serious mention of a turkey pardon by the president, and in the beginning of the tradition that we know today. President Bush pardoned a Thanksgiving turkey every year that he was in office, and every president since has continued the tradition. Today, the National Turkey Federation presents 4 turkeys to the presidents. 2 are ready-to-eat turkeys, which become the president's Thanksgiving dinner, and the other 2 are live birds. The first is the national turkey, who gets pardoned in a big public ceremony, and the other is the alternate national turkey, who steps in if the first bird can't fulfill his duties. Of course, the national turkey doesn't really have any duties. After the pardon, both birds are sent to live out their lives in a petting zoo or on a farm. And since 2005, the turkeys have gone somewhere even more special. They have been sent to Disneyland in California to be grand marshals of the Disneyland Thanksgiving Day Parade. Not all turkeys get their own parade, though. In 2007, more than 271 million turkeys were raised in the U.S., and 235 million of them were eaten. About 46 million of them were eaten at Thanksgiving alone. And in fact, nearly 88% of Americans report that they eat turkey at Thanksgiving. Another 22 million turkeys are eaten at Christmas and 19 million at Easter. Sarah Hale probably didn't think much about the turkey when she fought for the National Day of Thanksgiving. She thought only about the importance of giving thanks for our blessings and how they could bring together a nation that was falling apart. She worked for 17 years, wrote thousands of letters herself, got her readers to write thousands more, and personally contacted 5 different presidents. Today we owe thanks not just to our blessings or the Pilgrims, but to the remarkable woman who never gave up. Thank you, Sarah Hale, for using your pen to bring millions of Americans together. The end. Whoa, that was a really long story, but I hope you enjoyed it. And we learned some things about Thanksgiving. We learned about the pardoned turkey, and also we learned about how a holiday can become a holiday. Do you have an idea for a holiday? I bet if you had a really good idea for a holiday, you could write the president too, and they might be able to make it a holiday too. That would be so fun. Thank you guys so much for sitting through this whole book. We read a chapter book today. That was really fun. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And tomorrow's Thanksgiving and will be the last Thanksgiving story before we open up our Christmas stories. All right? So I'll see you again tomorrow for our last Thanksgiving story. All right? Goodbye.